Flight attendant demands man leave first class, turns pale when he shows his ID. Welcome, everyone. Today's story begins in the lofty realm of first-class air travel, where plush seats and exclusive service can sometimes give rise to questionable judgments. Imagine yourself stepping onto a plane, feeling a mixture of excitement and relief at the promise of comfort, only to be judged the instant you take your seat. In this tale, a flight attendant's hasty assumptions spark a clash that no one on board will soon forget. The ensuing confrontation, full of high-stakes tension and jaw-dropping twists, forces both passengers and crew to question how quickly we judge others and how the truth can overturn appearances in the blink of an eye. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Celia Roberts had always dreamed of the sky. As a child, she collected airplane models and pored over pictures of exotic locales. When she landed a position as a flight attendant for American Airlines, she felt her life was on the right track at last. She liked to imagine her uniform signified elegance and authority, never mind the long hours and jet lag. She reveled in the small perks, such as the compliments from frequent flyers and the chance to chat with interesting passengers. It gave her a sense of status she sometimes feared she lacked in her personal life. The day's itinerary included Flight A1973 from Seattle Tacoma International Airport to JFK in New York. Celia felt both excitement and apprehension. This was a cross-country trip, often filled with CIPs, business magnates, and well-heeled vacationers in first class. She looked forward to the chance of brushing shoulders with the elite and maybe scoring a generous tip or two. While the plane readied for boarding, Celia stood in the sleek first-class cabin, smoothing the wrinkles from her navy blue uniform. She double-checked that each seat's overhead bin contained the correct stock of pillows and blankets, and that the pre-flight champagne was chilling. Everything had to be perfect. This was the realm of high-paying customers, and Celia prided herself on meeting their every expectation. Midway through her checklist, she caught sight of a late boarding passenger meandering up the aisle. He was tall, mid-40s, wearing a casual blazer over a simple black t-shirt. He carried a well-worn leather satchel. Something about him, maybe his calm, unhurried pace, caught her eye. She glanced at his ticket in his hand, though she couldn't read the seat assignment at a distance. As he approached the first-class partition, Celia stepped forward politely, expecting the man to either continue on to coach or to present his boarding pass for scanning. He did neither. Instead, he sidestepped into seat 3A, storing his satchel carefully beneath the seat in front of him. Celia's brows knitted slightly. She checked her official manifest on the digital tablet assigned to her. Seat 3A was typically reserved for a certain Matthew Grant, a well-known venture capitalist who often flew American Airlines. The passenger manifest for this flight also listed a Mr. M. Grant in seat 3A, but the man dropping into that plush seat looked different from the Matthew Grant she'd seen in past flights. Celia recalled Mr. Grant as older, with salt and pepper hair and a trademark navy sports coat. The man in front of her now looked younger and more relaxed. She decided there must be some mistake. "Sir," she said politely, stepping over, "this seat is assigned to Mr. Grant. May I see your boarding pass, please?" He offered her a slight smile, pulling a crisp boarding pass from his pocket. Celia's eyes flicked over it indeed. It read Matthew Grant, seat 3A, with this flight's details. The corresponding ID he handed her had the name Matthew James Grant, same as the ticket. The photo matched him, albeit from a few years earlier. Her confusion deepened. The man certainly didn't match the mental image of the frequent traveler she thought she knew. Maybe he'd changed his appearance since the last time she'd encountered him. Yet, something about him felt off. Celia couldn't quite put her finger on it, but an uneasy prickle crept up her arms. She returned the ID, her expression polite but guarded. "All right, Mr. Grant. Welcome aboard," she said, forcing a smile. She decided not to push the matter. If the ID matched, then everything must be in order, even if he wasn't the same Matthew Grant she expected. After all, there could be more than one Matthew Grant in the world, she reasoned. But an itch of doubt nagged her mind. In an age of identity theft and upgraded ticket scams, it was always possible that someone had forged an ID. The real occupant of 3A might board any second, outraged to find his seat taken. Celia lingered by the man's row, observing discreetly. Her mind raced with speculation. What if he's an imposter? She decided to wait and see if the other Matthew Grant might show up. If that happened, she would have to intervene. Little did she know just how much trouble a single-seat assignment would soon unleash. As passengers filed in, Celia kept glancing at seat 3A. The man she believed to be an imposter settled in calmly, requesting a glass of sparkling water. He thanked her warmly when she brought it, which only heightened her confusion. Most con artists or scammers, she imagined, would be more evasive, maybe even rude. This man was polite, if a bit guarded. Finally, when boarding completed and the aircraft door sealed, Celia realized no other Matthew Grant had come forward. The seat was indeed assigned to him, so that must be that. Nevertheless, something still pricked at her. She told herself to let it go. The flight needed to take off smoothly, and she had other responsibilities. The plane taxied to the runway. The cabin lights flickered slightly, and Celia performed the safety demonstration alongside her colleagues. She felt a subtle tension, a disquiet that refused to fade. Her rational mind argued that everything was in order. The ID matched, no one else had claimed the seat, and the passenger displayed no suspicious behavior. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something about him seemed out of place. Once in the air, Celia sprang into motion, ensuring first-class drinks were served. Orders were taken for the meal service, and overhead bins remained secure. During the meal service, she found Mr. Grant watching her with mild curiosity. She offered him a small smile, which he returned, but the intensity of his gaze unnerved her. In an attempt at conversation, she asked, "So, Mr. Grant, are you traveling for business or leisure?" He took a moment to set down his fork. "A bit of both," he replied. "I do have some meetings in New York, but hopefully there'll be time to explore." Celia nodded politely. She noticed he had a well-traveled watch on his wrist, perhaps a Tag Heuer, though she wasn't certain. It looked expensive. Another point that clashed with her earlier suspicion of a ticket upgrade scam. If he was wearing a watch that cost thousands, was it likely he was scamming an airline seat? As Celia continued serving the other passengers, she eavesdropped occasionally on his brief conversation with a seatmate, an older gentleman named Mr. Barrington, who recognized him from some philanthropic event. She overheard Mr. Barrington say, "It's wonderful to see you again, Matthew. I remember hearing about your volunteer work in Boston." That revelation made Celia's concerns swirl anew. If the man had philanthropic ties and was recognized by name, maybe he was indeed the real Matthew Grant, a different one from her usual passenger. The pieces kind of fit, but they also raised more questions. Could there truly be two Matthew Grants who both frequent first class, but look nothing alike and carry the same philanthropic reputation? The tension in her gut refused to dissipate. She found herself glancing at seat 3A more than necessary. Just before the flight hit cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign extinguished, and Celia was free to move about more liberally. She decided to do one final cross-check. The flight manifest had seat assignments, and a flight attendant app on her airline-issued tablet contained frequent flyer statuses and passenger photos for certain VIPs. If the man in seat 3A was a major philanthropic figure or frequent traveler, His photo might appear there. Retreating to the galley, she logged into her app, Matthew Grant, seat 3A. She tapped the name. The app displayed a single profile result, a black and white photo of the older man she'd served many times before. A short bio mention read, Matthew Grant, chairman of Grant and Albright Industries. This was definitely not the same man who currently occupied 3A. Her heart thudded. That meant the passenger in seat 3A was not the Matthew Grant that the airline recognized as a VIP. So who was he? Celia frowned, leaning against the aircraft's steel counter. She realized she'd made a grave oversight earlier. The ID looked real, but it might have been carefully forged. The passenger in 3A might be an imposter piggybacking on the name recognition to land a seat in first class. If so, he was cunning and bold enough to talk with someone who claimed to recognize him, which only added to the puzzle. She decided to discreetly confront him, or at least verify more details. She typed a quick note to the lead flight attendant, Serena, who was busy in the main cabin, and asked her to come to the first-class galley at her earliest convenience. Celia's heart pounded. She was about to open a can of worms mid-flight, all based on a hunch. But if she was right, it could be a serious matter. After a few minutes, Serena arrived in the first-class galley, eyes filled with curiosity. She was a veteran flight attendant with over 15 years of experience, known for her calm approach to crises. Celia took a moment to gather her thoughts before diving in. "We have a passenger in 3A claims to be Matthew Grant," Celia began, voice low. "But the frequent flyer records show a different Matthew Grant for that seat. The ID he showed me matches the name, but not the photo I have on file." Serena's brow furrowed. "Could be an administrative glitch. Or maybe it's a father and son with the same name, or a common name fiasco." Celia chewed her lip. "Possibly. But I also overheard him telling someone he was recognized from philanthropic work in Boston. He's even wearing a pretty expensive watch. So, if he's an imposter, he's going to great lengths." Serena rubbed her chin, thinking, "I do recall the older Matthew Grant. He typically asks for Earl Grey tea. This man didn't do that, right?" Celia shook her head. "No, just sparkling water." Serena let out a cautious sigh. "We can't accuse him of wrongdoing just yet. The seat is in his name, ID matches. Let's see if we can discreetly confirm more details. Worst case scenario, we might phone ground support from the aircraft to verify. If he's in the seat legitimately, we don't want to cause a scene and upset an actual VIP." Celia hesitated. "Right. But if he's a phony, we have to handle it quickly. The airline could face liability issues if we ignore it, especially if he's forging documents." Serena agreed. They devised a plan to approach seat 3A again and request a second verification under the guise of an update to the passenger list. Meanwhile, they'd also ask him to confirm some personal details, such as his booking reference. It was a risky move mid-flight, but they saw no other immediate choice to clarify the discrepancy. Celia's nerves buzzed with adrenaline as she and Serena walked towards seat 3A. The cabin lights were dimmed slightly for comfort, but the hush made every word they spoke seem louder. Arriving at row 3, Celia offered the passenger a polite smile. "Mr. Grant," Celia began, "our system shows an update. Could we confirm a few details about your reservation? We want to ensure our records are accurate for your meal and onward connections." He lifted an eyebrow, glancing from Celia to Serena. "Sure," he said evenly. "What would you like to know?" Serena consulted a small notepad. "Just your booking reference code, if you have it. Also, if you have any frequent flyer membership details, we'd like to ensure you get the appropriate mileage credit." He paused, as if weighing the request. Then he nodded. "I believe my booking code is AS57J. But let me check." He reached into his blazer pocket, retrieving a folded confirmation slip. Indeed, it displayed a code as 57J, matching the flight details and seat assignment for Matthew Grant. Serena's eyes flicked to Celia, showing her a silent, "I'm impressed" expression. Celia tried not to appear flustered. She continued, "Do you happen to have an A Advantage membership with American Airlines? Our records show a different number for a Matthew Grant assigned to this seat." He shook his head lightly. "No, not that I'm aware of. My assistant booked this flight. Maybe there was confusion. I usually travel under my global membership." Here, he rifled through a separate pocket and produced a sleek black membership card from a partner airline program. It bore the name Matthew J. Grant. It looked entirely legitimate. Celia's heart sank. The more he cooperated, the more it appeared that he was indeed a rightful occupant. Yet the difference in the airline's VIP profile still nagged her. She forced a smile. "Thank you for clarifying. That's all we needed to confirm." Serena chimed in smoothly. "If there's anything else you need, Mr. Grant, please don't hesitate to ask." They retreated to the galley once more, feeling more confused than ever. The passenger in 3 had all the right paperwork, a consistent story, and no sign of duplicity. Could Celia's initial suspicion simply be a case of 2 different frequent flyers sharing the same name? Serena shrugged. "It's not unheard of. We do have a lot of Smiths, Johnsons, even some Grants. Perhaps it's a pure coincidence. If all the credentials line up, I'm leaning toward him being legit." Celia nodded slowly, though the uneasy feeling remained. She told herself to drop it. The last thing she wanted was to harass a paying passenger with an unsubstantiated suspicion. She decided that after the flight, she'd double-check the airline system to confirm the second Matthew Grant's personal data. For now, she would treat him as any other first-class traveler. However, fate had other plans. An unexpected twist would soon drop into her lap, forcing her to confront the man. A second time only this time, the stakes would be far higher, and an element of immediate karma would come into play, revealing who truly had the upper hand. Halfway through the flight, Celia's phone vibrated with an urgent push notification from the airline's flight attendant app. She saw the words "Security Alert" flash on the screen. Tension coiled in her stomach. Security alerts mid-flight were rare and typically indicated a pressing matter, possibly a passenger wanted by authorities or a stolen boarding pass. Her mind immediately flitted to seat 3A, but she forced herself not to jump to conclusions. She slipped into the galley and opened the message. It was brief. "Check seat assignment, 3A possible ID conflict. Subject flagged for additional verification. Contact pilot if confirmed discrepancy." Her heart leapt to her throat. The message didn't specify details, but it confirmed that her instincts weren't entirely unfounded. The airline's security system had flagged seat 3A. Celia felt a mix of dread and validation. She needed to proceed carefully. Bracing herself, Celia hurried to find Serena. She showed her the security alert. Serena's eyes widened. "We can't handle this alone," she whispered. "We need to inform the captain." They made their way to the cockpit, where Captain Harlan Stone and First Officer Kelly Lyons were busy monitoring flight instruments. Despite the limited space, Celia and Serena stepped in quietly. The captain gestured for them to speak. In hushed tones, Celia explained the situation. "We have a potential ID conflict for seat 3A. The passenger claims to be Matthew J. Grant, but the system just flagged him." Captain Stone's brow creased in concern. "You have his documentation?" Serena nodded. "Yes, everything looks real, but the security system wouldn't flag it without reason." Stone tapped a code into the plane's secure communication system. "I'll contact ground control to see if they can provide more specifics. In the meantime, remain professional. Don't confront him unless he's posing a direct threat." Celia felt her pulse race. A direct confrontation in midair could escalate unpredictably. She retreated with Serena to the front galley, waiting for any update from the cockpit. Minutes ticked by like hours. Passengers continued resting, reading, or watching movies in blissful ignorance. Meanwhile, tension constricted Celia's every breath. Finally, Captain Stone summoned them again. His expression was grave. Ground control says there's confusion about a potential stolen identity. The real Matthew Grant, our frequent flyer VIP, claims he was rebooked on a different flight. But his name was used on this one. The ID might be forged, or the passenger might have used a legitimate name that belongs to someone else. We're not sure. Celia's mind spun, but his boarding pass, ID, everything looks legit. He even produced membership credentials from a partner airline. Stone nodded. Scammers can be sophisticated. For now, we proceed with caution. If he's not causing trouble, we'll land at JFK and let airport security handle it. But if we suspect anything dangerous, we have to act. Serena cut in, voice quivering slightly. He's done nothing threatening. He's polite, even recognized by another passenger. Mr. Barrington. Stone scratched his chin. Yes, that complicates matters. Let's see if we can gather more intel discreetly. If we approach him directly, and he's actually a dangerous individual, we could escalate the situation needlessly. Meanwhile, I'll keep an open line with the TSA in case we need immediate action upon landing. Celia's stomach sank. This was beyond anything she'd experienced. She recalled the chilling stories of flight attendants who had to subdue violent individuals or coordinate with air marshals. She thanked the stars. There was no sign of aggression from seat 3A. The man even seemed helpful. So was he a criminal or a victim of a bizarre identity coincidence? As she stepped back into the cabin, Celia's heart hammered. She told Serena she'd do a quiet observation pass. The hush of the plane felt oppressive, every passenger's face a blur of innocence or potential deception. Approaching row 3, she forced a genial smile. The man in seat 3A was flipping through a magazine, looking calm. "Another bottle of water for you, Mr. Grant?" she asked, masking her anxiety. He nodded. "Yes, please. And could I have a black coffee as well?" "Certainly," Celia replied. She pivoted away, retrieving his drink order from the galley. Her hands trembled slightly. What if he's armed? She wondered, fear surging. She had no reason to suspect that, but the alarm from the airline system fed her worst imaginings. She returned with the coffee and water. As she handed them over, she noticed him slip a small black wallet back into his blazer. She glimpsed a silver badge inside it, just for the briefest moment. Her breath caught. A badge? Was he law enforcement? Then why the discrepancy with his identity? Their eyes locked. He'd noticed her noticing. An unreadable expression crossed his face. If Celia had harbored any doubts that something big was brewing, that moment banished them. Adrenaline shot through her veins as she realized the story behind seat 3A was more complicated than a mere seat swap scam. She was about to find out just how complicated and dangerous it might be. Celia retreated to the galley, heart hammering against her ribs. She was torn between warning the captain about the badge and not wanting to overreact. She replayed the fleeting image in her mind, a small, round emblem with a distinctive eagle. Could it be a federal badge, an off-duty FBI agent, a U.S. Marshal? She told herself to calm down. If the man was legitimate law enforcement, he might be traveling under an alias for operational reasons. In that case, the stolen identity flag on the system might actually be part of a larger cover. Or, conversely, he could be a dangerous criminal with a forged badge. The swirling possibilities gave her a headache. Before she could summon Serena, the man himself appeared in the aisle, heading toward the lavatory at the front of first class. As he passed by the galley, he paused, giving Celia a searching look. "Is everything all right, miss?" he asked, voice calm. "You seem tense." She forced a bright smile that probably looked anything but natural. Just a little turbulence up ahead, sir. Nothing to worry about. He nodded, though a trace of concern lingered in his eyes. Then he continued on his way. After he disappeared into the lavatory, Celia finally exhaled. She grabbed Serena's arm, pulling her close. "Serena, I saw a badge in his jacket. I think he might be law enforcement. That might explain the ID confusion." Serena's eyes went wide. "Are you certain?" "Not entirely, but it looked real. Like a federal badge. Maybe that's why the system flagged him. He's traveling incognito." Serena blew out a breath. "Let's let the captain know. If he's a federal agent, maybe we can confirm that with our ground security." They moved swiftly toward the cockpit once more, stepping inside to share their new discovery. Captain Stone's brow furrowed deeper. "Law enforcement traveling under an alias is plausible. We do sometimes have undercover agents or air marshals on board. Normally, the airline is informed, but if it's a black ops mission or high-level security issue, maybe we wouldn't be in the loop." He opened a secure channel to ground security again, relaying the new information about a possible badge. Another tense wait followed. Minutes later, a text message scrolled across the cockpit screen. "Confirm name. Possible undercover federal air marshal. Do not confront, await verification." Serena sucked in a shaky breath. "He could be a federal air marshal assigned to our flight. That typically happens incognito in economy, though, not first class." Captain Stone shrugged. "Sometimes they sit in different sections to remain inconspicuous. We should do nothing that compromises his cover. Let's see if we get final confirmation before we land." Celia felt relief, mingled with embarrassment. "I nearly pegged an undercover law enforcement official as a criminal." She also remembered how she'd harbored doubts about him from the start, even thinking he was forging a ticket. Another wave of guilt seeped in. If he was indeed legitimate, she might have caused more trouble than he could afford. But the tension wasn't over yet. As they returned to the cabin, they found a hush had fallen over first class. The man who might be an undercover marshal was back in his seat, scanning the cabin with an alert gaze. Two other first-class passengers, Mr. Barrington and a woman named Miss Alden, were deep in conversation, occasionally glancing in his direction as if they, too, sensed something unusual about him. Celia approached the galley once again, intending to remain out of earshot, but Miss Alden stood and quietly sidled up to her. "Excuse me," Miss Alden said, voice quivering. "That man in 3A is making me uneasy. I overheard something about a stolen identity. Is everything okay?" Caught off guard, Celia realized Miss Alden must have heard her earlier conversation with Serena. She forced a reassuring tone. "We have everything under control, Miss Alden. Please don't worry. Enjoy the rest of your flight." Miss Alden frowned, unconvinced. If there's a security risk, Celia gently placed a hand on her arm. "There's no immediate risk. We appreciate your concern, but it's best to remain calm. The situation is being handled." With a resigned nod, Miss Alden returned to her seat. Celia feared rumors would start spreading. The last thing she wanted was a cabin panic. If word got out that seat 3A was an undercover agent or worse, an imposter. Every second that ticked by felt longer than the last. Finally, the cockpit called again. Captain Stone delivered the verdict in a low voice to Celia and Serena. "Ground security says the passenger is indeed an undercover law enforcement official, FBI Special Agent Matthew Grant. He's traveling with minimal notice, likely on an urgent assignment." They apologized for the confusion. The mismatch with the airline system stems from his use of a new alias that ironically matches a known VIP passenger in our system. The short version, he's legitimate with a covert ID. We're to leave him be and not blow his cover. Celia nearly collapsed with relief. But then Captain Stone added, "He's traveling under the name Matthew Grant for a reason, so do not let on that we know." Keep everything discreet. Celia's thoughts whirled. He's the real deal, but not the wealthy older man we typically see. That explains the philanthropic references, the fancy watch, the calm demeanor, possibly all part of his cover story. She felt a wave of immediate karma wash over her. She'd been so quick to suspect him of wrongdoing. In reality, he was a federal agent protecting them, possibly investigating something on board. Serena's face mirrored Celia's shock. They exchanged wide-eyed glances. Their earlier attempts to verify him must have signaled that they suspected something. No wonder he kept watching them so intently. A flush of embarrassment climbed Celia's cheeks as she realized how close she'd come to forcibly confronting a legitimate FBI agent for stealing first-class status. She was the one who might have been in the wrong all along. In the moments following that revelation, Celia struggled to maintain composure. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the weight of knowing Seat 3A was an armed federal agent on a covert mission. She recalled her mother's cautionary words about jumping to conclusions. I practically accused him in my mind, and now she took a few deep breaths, squaring her shoulders. Regardless of her personal feelings, she had a job to do, keep the cabin calm and remain vigilant. She also realized that if the FBI agent was undercover, it might mean there was a real threat on board. Possibly he was tracking a suspect or waiting for the right moment to intervene. Celia scanned the faces of the other first-class passengers, suddenly seeing them as potential criminals or persons of interest. Just then, a beep sounded in her earpiece, the device flight attendants often used to speak discreetly. Serena's voice crackled softly. "Celia, can you come to row 8? We have a situation." Celia hurried down the aisle past the first-class curtain, bridging into the main cabin's premium economy section. She spotted Serena, trying to calm a red-faced man who was yelling at another passenger. The flight's hush was shattered by the man's raised voice. "She's been in my seat the entire time!" The man fumed. "I went to the restroom, and now she won't move. This is ridiculous." The woman in the seat refused to budge, claiming she had a boarding pass for that very spot. Chaos reigned as other passengers craned their necks to watch. Celia stepped in, pulling up the seat map on her tablet. The woman's boarding pass indicated seat 8A, while the man's indicated 8B. They had apparently swapped seats earlier, but now were in a tug-of-war over who had the right to remain. A normal seat dispute, frustrating, but hardly ominous. Yet Celia couldn't shake the sense that everything was connected, that the FBI agent's presence signaled a bigger puzzle piece. She reminded herself that not every conflict was a federal case. She calmly asked them both to produce boarding passes, verifying the seat assignments. Sure enough, the man's actual seat was 8B, and the woman's was 8A. After a brief standoff, the man realized he'd forgotten his original seat was B, not A. He slumped, muttering an apology. Just as Celia thought the matter was resolved, the man flared up again, complaining about the airline's ineptitude, demanding an upgrade for the inconvenience. Serena tried to placate him with a complimentary beverage, but he refused, cursing under his breath and flailing his arms. Suddenly, Celia caught a subtle movement from behind. Someone stepped into the aisle. It was the man from first class, Matthew Grant. He laid a gentle hand on the angry man's shoulder. Celia's blood ran cold. What is he doing here? He's blowing his cover, but the agent spoke in a calm, soothing tone. "Sir, one understand you're upset, but you're causing a scene. How about you cool down, or we'll have to involve authorities once we land." His voice held a quiet authority that extended beyond that of a mere passenger. The red-faced man whirled. "Who are you?" In one fluid motion, the agent reached into his blazer and flashed a small ID card different from the boarding pass. Celia's eyes widened. She saw the bold letters FBI printed across it, along with the agent's photo. The man in seat 8B stepped back in shock, mouth agape. Celia's heart hammered. She realized the agent was effectively revealing his identity to a small cluster of passengers, including her. She wanted to intervene, to hush him, but the entire scenario was spiraling. The row 8 man stammered, "FBI, what does that have to do with me? I'm not doing anything illegal." The agent slid the ID away. "Then you have nothing to worry about," he said coolly. "Now kindly sit down, or I'll have the captain turn this plane around and we'll sort this out on the ground." Immediate karma slammed Celia. She recalled demanding that this same man show his ID to prove he belonged in first class. Now, seeing the official FBI credentials in front of everyone, she felt a wave of mortification. He was someone with far more authority than she had, and she'd basically tried to oust him from a seat he rightfully occupied. The angry passenger grumbled a final protest, then took seat 8B as originally assigned. The rest of the cabin stared in stunned silence at the FBI agent. For a moment, no one dared speak. Then he locked eyes with Celia. His expression was calm but carried a hint of amusement, as if acknowledging their earlier tension. Celia felt her cheeks burn. As quietly and unobtrusively as he had stepped into the aisle, the FBI agent turned and walked back to first class. Celia stood there, heart pounding. Passengers buzzed with whispers, some asking each other why there was an FBI agent on board. The seat dispute was forgotten in favor of this more tantalizing piece of gossip. Serena placed a reassuring hand on Celia's shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "He had to intervene, I guess." Celia nodded, but her thoughts churned. She felt an overwhelming urge to talk to him privately, both to apologize for her earlier suspicions and to understand his presence on this flight. She recalled the flight deck's instructions to maintain discretion. Approaching him might jeopardize his mission. Yet he'd effectively exposed himself to half a dozen passengers in row 8. Discretion seemed moot at this point. As the plane continued its journey, tension hovered in the atmosphere. Celia and Serena did their best to restore normalcy, resuming the beverage service and politely deflecting questions about the FBI guy. They gave vague assurances that everything was fine. Finally, with about an hour left before landing, Celia worked up the courage to approach seat 3A again. She found the agent calmly sipping water, scanning something on a tablet. She leaned in gently. "Sir, do you have a moment?" He set his tablet aside, looking up. "Of course." Celia swallowed, nerves taut. I just wanted to say I apologize if I caused you any inconvenience earlier. We noticed a discrepancy in the system and grew suspicious. I had no idea you were. You know, a faint smile tugged at his lips. "No need to apologize. You were doing your job, ensuring passengers are in their correct seats." She tried to return the smile, but felt it wobble. "I'm just sorry I doubted you. I should have realized there could be a legitimate reason. You must have wondered why I was hovering, asking all those questions." He tilted his head thoughtfully. "I did suspect you might be on to me, or at least knew something was off. I hoped it wouldn't blow my cover, but your caution was understandable." A small sigh of relief escaped Celia. "Thank you for understanding. Also, I wanted to confirm, is everything okay now? Do we need to do anything else to support you?" His gaze flicked over her shoulder, scanning the cabin. Then he nodded. "Everything is under control. My presence here was partly precautionary, related to a possible threat, but it appears to be a false alarm." He paused, eyes softening. "I appreciate your concern and your discretion." Celia felt a surge of gratitude. The entire flight had turned into a swirl of suspicion and revelations, culminating in the moment she saw his FBI ID. She lowered her voice. "I promise we won't cause any more complications for you." He gave a gentle chuckle. "I appreciate it. And He seemed to choose his next words carefully. I get it, though. If you see someone in first class who doesn't match the usual record, you have to verify. That's your responsibility. I respect that. Her cheeks warmed again, this time in relief rather than embarrassment. She excused herself politely and returned to the galley. A significant weight had lifted from her. She felt a new sense of respect for how easily an assumption could be wrong, especially in a world where appearances and records might not tell the whole story. By the time Flight AN in 1873 began its descent into JFK, most of the drama had simmered down. The cabin lights brightened gently, stirring sleepy travelers from their naps. Celia and Serena did their final rounds, ensuring seatbacks were upright, trays stowed, and electronics switched off. The man in seat 3A, Special Agent Matthew Grant, as Celia now knew him, gathered his satchel and politely thanked Celia for her service. She responded in kind, offering him a pressed lip smile that conveyed understanding. The flicker of tension that had once existed between them was gone, replaced by mutual respect. When the wheels touched down, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the cabin. For the unsuspecting passengers, it was just another smooth landing. Only Celia, Serena, the captain, and a few who witnessed the agent flash his badge knew the flight had carried an undercover FBI officer, and that a suspicious seat assignment had nearly set off a chain reaction of chaos. At the gate, passengers rose, retrieving luggage from overhead compartments. Celia stood at the first-class exit, offering farewells. Mr. Barrington left first, praising the flight service. Miss Alden exited, nodding politely, though with an expression that suggested she'd be texting her friends about the FBI guy the moment she hit the terminal. Finally, seat 3A approached. He paused, meeting Celia's gaze. "Thank you for your patience," he said quietly. She felt her voice hitch, recalling how she'd practically demanded that he leave first class at the beginning. With a flush of embarrassment, she extended her hand. "Thank you for your service and for understanding." His handshake was firm but gentle. Then he stepped into the jet bridge, disappearing into the tide of travelers. A swirl of emotions flooded Celia: relief, curiosity, lingering embarrassment, and something like admiration. A few seconds later, Captain Stone emerged from the cockpit. He caught Celia's eye and gave a curt nod. She understood it as a message. "We handled it." She returned the nod, feeling the tension slowly melt away. Soon after, the flight crew disembarked. As Celia walked through JFK's bustling terminal, the memory of seat 3A lingered in her mind. She thought about how quickly she'd jumped to conclusions, how nearly she'd confronted a legitimate FBI agent for suspicious behavior that turned out to be part of a vital mission. It was the sort of immediate karma that came from letting assumptions overshadow genuine inquiry. Back at her crash pad later that evening, she reflected on the day's events. In this line of work, she'd learned many lessons about people's hidden stories, but never so vividly as on Flight AN in 1873. She promised herself she would remember that ID and appearances could be deceiving, and that sometimes the best course of action is to keep an open mind and a calm approach. For while seat 3A looked like a potential imposter, the truth was far more interesting: an undercover FBI agent fulfilling his duty, quietly protecting the passengers, even the flight attendant, who nearly sent him packing from his rightful first-class seat. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable flight, where first impressions and assumptions almost derailed an undercover mission.